They climbed the mountain to save their marriage. They came down to destroy each other. Don't fast forward. The last 10 seconds will change your idea of what love is capable of. The journal smelled like dust and forgotten things. I found it buried under a stack of winter sweaters while packing for the trip, its leather cover cracked like dried earth. My handwriting from 10 years ago stared back at me, loopy, frantic, alive. Climb Machu Picchu at dawn, one entry demanded. Kiss someone who terrifies you, another insisted. I traced the words, my finger catching on the indentations left by a younger version of myself, a girl who wore combat boots, and wrote poetry about train tracks. Now, at 31, I measured my life in lesson plans and grocery lists. My husband Garrett called from the kitchen, his voice slicing through the memory. Lila, did you pack the charger? I snapped the journal shut, but its ghost clung to my palms. Garrett's laughter floated up the stairs, warm and rehearsed. 7 years of marriage had turned us into experts at routine. Thursday takeout, Sunday hikes, midnights where we'd lie back to back, pretending sleep. But lately, his eyes had started lingering on the exits, windows, doorways, the glow of his phone at 2 a.m. I told myself it was work stress. He'd been promoted at the architecture firm, his blueprints swallowing weekends whole. Still, when he suggested this trip, Derek's got a cabin in the Rockies just like old times, I'd hesitated. Derek was Garrett's college roommate, a man he described as unfiltered, which I'd learned meant dangerous. The mountain road coiled like a serpent, pine trees clawing at the rental car's windows. Garrett drove with one hand on the wheel, the other tapping rhythms only he could hear. His college stories filled the space between us. Tales of bonfires, stolen street signs, a night in jail that ended with a judge's warning. Derek talked our way out, he said, grinning at a memory I wasn't part of. The GPS chimed, 15 miles to destination, and his smile tightened. I watched his reflection in the side mirror. His jawline, once softened by boyhood, had sharpened into something unreadable. We'd met at a bookstore in Denver, him holding a dog-eared Kerouac, me hiding behind a Bronte. He called me mysterious. Now he called me practical. The journal burned in my suitcase, its secrets simmering. What happened to the girl who wanted storms? The tires hummed against asphalt, and for a heartbeat, I considered grabbing the wheel, veering us into the unknown. Instead, I rolled down the window and let the cold air slap my face. Derek's cabin hunched at the edge of a cliff, its wooden bones groaning in the wind. No lights greeted us, just the skeletal outline of a porch swing creaking on rusted chains. Garrett killed the engine, and the silence rushed in. Charming, I said, reaching for sarcasm to steady myself. He didn't laugh. The door swung open before we knocked. Derek stood haloed in candlelight, shirtless, a paintbrush tucked behind his ear like a cigarette. His eyes, the color of tarnished silver, locked onto mine first. Lila Carter, he said, my name a challenge on his tongue. The hug he pulled me into smelled of turpentine and bourbon, his hands lingering at the small of my back. Over his shoulder, Garrett watched, his expression unreadable. Inside, the cabin pulsed with chaos. Canvases leaned against walls, screaming with color, a woman's face melting into crows, a fetus curled inside a bullet casing. Still cheerful, I see, Garrett joked, but his voice strained. Derek poured wine into jelly glasses, never looking away from me. Garrett said you teach kids to hate Shakespeare, he said. I prefer to think I'm teaching them survival. I replied. his smirk cut through the shadows. Smart. Lies are safer than truth. When Garrett proposed the game, truth or dare? For nostalgia's sake, the candle flames shuddered. Derek raised his glass. To old habits. I drank, the wine bitter as a lie. Outside, the mountains whispered warnings we were too reckless to hear. The fire devoured another log, its sparks clawing at the air like trapped insects. Garrett sprawled on the moth-eaten couch, his third glass of wine tilting dangerously. Derek sat cross-legged on the floor, sketching my profile on a napkin with charcoal-stained fingers. Truth or dare, Lila? Garrett's voice slithered through the haze. I chose dare because truths felt heavier in this room, a room where the walls leaned closer with every breath. He dared me to recite Shakespeare backward. To be or not to be became ebton roebot, the nonsense syllables twisting into an incantation. Derek's laugh was a low growl. You're wasting her, he said to Garrett, tossing the napkin into the flames. It curled into ash, my inked eyes dissolving first. Garrett's next dare was for Derek. Show us the tattoo you regret. Derek stood slowly, his shirt hitting the floor like a surrender flag. Across his ribs, a serpent coiled around a rose, its fangs buried in the petals. Done in Prague, he said, after a woman left me for a monk. Garrett's gaze flicked to me, testing. I focused on the snake's eyes, tiny mirrors reflecting the fire's hunger. The wine turned my bones to liquid, but the journal's voice in my head stayed sharp. Kiss someone who terrifies you. Garrett's dare came like a hammer. Lila, kiss him. Like you mean it. The room froze. Derek's charcoal dusted the air as he stilled. The camera's red eye blinked from the corner. Garrett's phone propped on a stack of art books, recording. Derek's thumb grazed my wrist. A question. His hands were colder than I expected. The first brush of his lips tasted like stolen things, rust, and nicotine, and the ghost of that Prague woman. Garrett's breath hitched behind the lens. Again, he ordered, his voice fraying at the edges. The second kiss was a performance. My fingers tangled in Derek's hair, his palms scorching my hip. I wondered if Garrett could see the calculations in my eyes, the way I measured each gasp, each shudder, like ingredients in a recipe I'd never serve. The camera kept rolling. Garrett's direction sharpened. Closer, slower. Look at him like you hate him. Derek's hands mapped my spine, his touch clinical, as if memorizing my architecture. This isn't desire, I realized. This is archaeology. He was digging for the girl in the journal, the one who'd written Risk Everything in the margins of a Sylvia Plath poem. When Garrett finally stopped recording, the silence rushed back, swollen and bruised. Derek lit a clove cigarette, the smoke curling into a question mark. Garrett scrolled through the footage, his face lit by the phone's blue glare. You're a natural, he said, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. Outside, the wind screamed through the pines, a sound like bones breaking. I reached for my wine, but the glass was empty. The journal's voice whispered again. What next? Dawn bled through the cabin's cracked windows, painting the floor in jagged stripes. Garrett snored on the couch, an empty wine bottle cradled, like a lover. My body ached, not from desire, but from the weight of performance. The journal lay open on the kitchen counter, its pages splayed like a dissected bird. Burn the life you're given. My younger self had scrawled in red ink. The words felt prophetic now. Derek studio door studajar. Inside, canvases glared at me, a self-portrait of his face split into thirds, saint, sinner, stranger. His laptop glowed, on a paint-splattered desk, the screensaver pulsing. Upload complete. A folder labeled Evidence blinked mockingly. My fingers hovered over the trackpad. The first video thumbnail froze on my face, lips parted in a counterfeit moan. The timestamp read 3:14 a.m. Garrett had edited out his own voice, leaving only my gasps and Derek's silence. The coffee mug shattered before I realized I'd thrown it. Garrett jolted awake, wine-bruised eyes narrowing at the shards. "You recorded us," I hissed, the laptop screen thrust toward him. He blinked slowly, a predator feigning innocence. "For us," he corrected. "A reminder." His thumb swiped left, revealing another folder, legal documents, a petition for divorce dated 2 weeks prior. "Adultery voids alimony," he said, as if reciting a grocery list. The mountain air turned to knives in my lungs. I thought of the journal's advice, risk everything, and wondered if the girl who wrote that knew how much everything could cost. Garrett reached for my wrist, his grip a shackle. "You wanted excitement," he said. "Now we're even." Outside, the wind screamed. I pictured his phone tumbling down the ravine, the video dissolving into pixels, the rental car's engine coughed to life. Derek appeared in the rearview mirror, shirtless, clutching a canvas. He tossed it into the back seat without a word, a painting of me mid-kiss, my eyes wide as a spooked mare. "For the road," he said. I didn't thank him. Garrett slept in the passenger seat, his face softened by shadows. At mile marker 17, I pulled over and opened his phone. The cloud password, Machu Picchu 2017, tasted like ash. I deleted every file, then hurled the device into the void. The journal followed, pages fluttering like surrender flags. Garrett stirred. "What did you do?" he slurred. I gripped the wheel, the road ahead a charcoal smudge. "What you taught me," I said. I edited the story. The school hallway buzzed with a different kind of electricity. Students clustered around lockers, phones glowing like fireflies. Whispers trailed me. "That's her," sharpened to daggers. My classroom door felt heavier, its handle slick with judgment. Inside, the whiteboard still bore last Friday's lesson. Macbeth, ambition versus morality. Irony hung thick as August humidity. A folded note sat on my desk. "Mrs. Carter, see Principal Alvarez immediately." The secretary's handwriting quivered, betraying pity. I traced the edges of Derek's, painting in my tote bag, the kiss-frozen underlayers of acrylic. Risk everything, the journal had said. It hadn't mentioned the cost, 23 pairs of teenage eyes, wide with borrowed shame. Principal Alvarez's office smelled of lemon disinfectant and unspoken verdicts. She gestured to a chair upholstered in institutional gray. A parent forwarded me this video. Her tablet screen pulsed, my back arched, Derek's hands possessive. The timestamp glowed, 3:14 a.m. Garrett's editing had erased himself, leaving only my sin. "Resign," she said, sliding a form across the desk. "Or we terminate you." The pen trembled in my grip. I thought of Garrett's smirk, his "now we're even," and the journal's ashes in the ravine. "No," I said, the word cracking like ice. "I'll leave." But not quietly. Garrett's laptop yielded secrets like a confessional. Folders nested inside folders. Life insurance policies, offshore accounts, emails to a lawyer-titled contingency plan. My face stared back from a spreadsheet, asset depreciation. In the garage, I packed 2 suitcases, one with clothes, one with proof, the camera lens from the cabin, warped by fire, rolled to the floor. I pocketed it, a talisman of fractured truths. Outside, rain blurred the streetlights. The journal's ghost whispered again, "Burn the life you're given." But survival, I realized, wasn't combustion, it was reconstruction. The courtroom smelled like polished wood and stale regret. I counted the ceiling tiles, 12, 13, 14, to avoid the stairs. Garrett sat flanked by lawyers, his suit tailored to perfection, his wedding band conspicuously absent. The judge's voice droned through procedural sludge. Petition for dissolution of marriage, citing irreconcilable differences. My fingers tightened around the warped camera lens in my pocket, its edges biting into my palm. Derek's painting leaned against my chair, still wrapped in butcher paper. He texted once after the cabin, "Don't blame yourself for wanting fire," but I'd left it unanswered. Now his art felt like a co-conspirator. The bailiff called my name. My heels echoed like gunshots. Garrett's lawyer painted me in broad strokes: unstable, reckless, a danger to shared assets. He projected the edited video onto a screen, my gasps amplified into grotesque theater. The jury winced. Garrett stared at his hands, a bad actor playing remorse. When my turn came, I unrolled Derek's painting, the kiss preserved in violent brushstrokes, and placed it beside the projector. "This is the truth," I said, my voice steady as a guillotine. The USB drive glinted in my palm. The judge nodded. The unedited video played, Garrett's voice directing. "Slower, look at him, his face lit by the phone's glow." The courtroom exhaled in unison. Garrett's chair screeched as he stood, but the bailiff's hand clamped his shoulder. "Sit down." The gavel's crack split the air. Divorce granted. Marital assets divided equally. Garrett's mask shattered. A snarl, a lunge, a chaos of limbs. They dragged him out, his shouts fading down the hall. "You'll regret this." The threat hung like smoke. Outside, Derek leaned against a pillar, a cigarette dangling from his lips. He nodded at the painting. "Keep it. It's happier with you." I handed him the USB. "Your art project's over." He smirked, but his eyes held winter. "Nothing's ever over, Lila." That night, I burned the journal in Derek's fireplace. Flames devoured, risk everything first, the pages curling into black petals. The camera lens glowed in the heat, a molten eye finally closing. The bus station reeked of diesel and stale hope. I clutched a one-way ticket to Denver, then beyond, somewhere the mountains wouldn't whisper Garrett's name. My suitcase held thrift store sweaters, Derek's painting, and the warped camera lens. The journal's ashes still clung to my coat sleeves, a phantom weight. A flickering TV above the benches played a daytime talk show, When Trust Betrays You. The audience gasped at a blurred still of my face. I pulled my hood lower. A teenager across the aisle stared, her phone angled like a sniper. "Aren't you?" she began. I stood abruptly, my seat screeching. The bathroom mirror showed a stranger, hair hacked short, eyes sharp as broken glass. I splashed water on my face, but the reflection stayed fractured. The pawn shop bell jangled. The clerk squinted at Derek's painting. "This ain't art," he grunted. "It's a crime scene." I shrugged. $50. He tossed cash on the counter. Outside, I bought a Patagonia guidebook from a street vendor. The pages smelled like cheap ink and pine. First rule of the wild, the introduction warned: never look back. At the library, I logged into Garrett's cloud one last time. The deleted video had resurrected in a forum thread, cuckolded husband's revenge. Comments dissected my face, my body, my choices. I typed a single reply, "You're watching a ghost." Then I wiped the account, watching pixels dissolve like smoke. The Greyhound's engine growled to life. I pressed the camera lens against the window, distorting the city into a watercolor blur. The driver announced final boarding as rain sheeted the pavement. A figure sprinted toward the bus, Derek drenched, clutching a canvas. "Forget this," he shouted, slapping it against the window. A self-portrait, his face split into 3 smears: saint, sinner, stranger. The bus pulled away. I left the canvas on the seat beside me, its edges curling in the damp. As Denver shrank in the distance, I opened the guidebook. Machu Picchu at dawn. It promised. The journal's ghost side, finally quiet. I snapped the lens in half, its jagged pieces catching the first true light of morning. Machu Picchu at dawn was a silent cathedral. Mist clung to the ruins like gauze, the stones humming with ancient secrets. My hiking boots slipped on wet grass, the guidebook's pages damp, in my back pocket. "Never look back," it advised, but the past clung like the Andes' thin air, sharp, relentless. The camera lens shards weighed my jacket, a makeshift grave for Garrett's lies. I traced the outline of the Temple of the Sun, my fingers brushing moss-stained granite. Below, the Urubamba River carved its path, indifferent to human dramas. A condor circled overhead, wings slicing through clouds. I wondered if it saw me, a speck in hiking gear clutching a water bottle, and regret. The journal's ashes felt lighter here, as if the altitude had absolved them. The local guide, a Quechua woman with iron gray braids, handed me coca leaves. "For the breath," she said, her Spanish softened by indigenous roots. She didn't ask my story, but her eyes lingered on the scarred lens pieces I'd laid on a rock. "Some things," she murmured, "are better left in Pachamama's belly." She pressed the leaves into my palm and vanished up the trail, her footsteps swallowed by stone. I chewed the leaves, bitterness flooding my tongue. Below, tourists clustered like ants, snapping photos of the lost city. Their laughter floated up, brittle and fleeting. I pulled out Derek's last painting, the 3-face self-portrait, and propped it against a weathered wall. The rain had blurred his features into ghosts. Saint, sinner, stranger. The wind lifted the canvas, carrying it into the abyss. At the summit, I unzipped my jacket. The lens fragments glinted in the rising sun, jagged, obsolete. The guidebook's map marked a cliffside, offering sight. Pilgrims once tossed gold figurines to the gods. I tossed Garrett's shattered lies. The shard spun, catching light like disco balls, then vanished into the void. The condor cried again, closer now. I unfurled the remaining page from the journal, the one I'd saved. "Burn the life you're given," it commanded. But here in the cradle of empires, fire felt redundant. I let the wind take the page, watched it dance above the ruins until it became a speck, then nothing. The condor followed, a dark shadow chasing a ghost. The coastal town of Valparaiso swallowed me whole, its hillsides a riot of murals and crumbling staircases. I rented a room above a fish market, the air salted with anchovies and diesel. Mornings began with the clatter of crates and fishermen's curses. My Spanish was fractured, but silence suited me. The landlady, Senora Rosa, left tamales wrapped in banana leaves at my door. She called me La Fantasma, the ghost, but her tone held no malice, only curiosity. I worked at a hostel, scrubbing floors and laundering sheets stained with strangers' adventures. The owner, a sun-leathered Argentine named Hugo, paid me in pesos and silence. At night, I climbed Cerro Alegre, past murals of skeletal lovers and neon virgins, until the harbor lights blurred into constellations. The warped camera lens shard, my last fragment, dug into my thigh from my pocket. I'd carried it like a shiv, waiting for a reason to let go. A storm lashed the coast for 3 days. Waves devoured the pier. Hugo's hostel groaned like a shipwreck. Tourists huddled in the common room, swapping rum and confessions. A German backpacker pressed a flask into my hand. "Your story," he slurred. "Tell it." I stared at his cracked lips, his sunburned earnestness. "I used to teach Macbeth," I said. "Now I mop floors." He laughed, thinking it a joke. Later, in the storage closet, I found a box of abandoned Polaroids, lovers on beaches, hikers mid-laugh, a dog wearing sunglasses. One photo stopped me, a woman's back, tattooed with a serpent eating its tail. Her face was cut off, but I knew the slope of her shoulders. Derek's Prague woman. The storm howled louder. I burned the photo in a chipped ashtray, its smoke curling into a question I refused to ask. The calm after the storm brought a carnival. Children chased paper dragons. Vendors sold churros dusted with guilt. Senora Rosa dragged me to the plaza, her grip iron. "Mira," she said, pointing to fishermen mending nets. "Roturas pueden ser fuertes." Broken things can be strong. I climbed the bell tower at midnight. The lens shard caught moonlight as I held it over the edge. The harbor glittered below, indifferent. Burn the life you're given. But the journal's ghost had grown faint here, drowned by tides. I dropped the shard, watching it pierce the dark like a falling star. Back in my room, I found Hugo's ledger open on my bed. A note in his jagged script. "Teach again. Sundays. Kids need Shakespeare." Outside, the carnival drums pulsed, a heartbeat not mine, but one I could borrow. The classroom smelled of chalk dust and ripe mangoes. 12 faces stared back at me. Fishermen's children, their knees scabbed, eyes bright as stolen candy. Hugo had nailed a plywood board to the wall. "Professor Elila." I wrote Macbeth in crooked letters, the M bleeding into the grain. "Ambition," I said, tracing the word. "What does it mean?" A boy in a messy jersey grinned. "Care to do," he said. "Wanting everything." The class giggled. Outside, the harbor bells clanged, but here, time bent softly. I taught them to curse in iambic pentameter. Double, double, toil and trouble. Their shouts shook the walls, Senora Rosa pounding the ceiling with a broom. Later, they brought me offerings. A seashell, a stolen lottery ticket, a lime green parrot feather. I pinned the feather to the board, its edges catching the salt-stained light. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Garrett's lawyer's seal, crisp and venomous. "Cease defamation or face litigation." The threat coiled like a scorpion. I fed it to Hugo's compost bin, watching worms devour the ink. That night, I climbed Cerro Alegre again, the lens shard's absence a phantom itch. The murals had changed. A new virgin wept neon tears above the words, "Nadia es innocent." No one is innocent. Derek found me there. He smelled of turpentine and airport vodka. "He's dying. He said, though I hadn't asked, Garrett's pancreas whiskey-rotted. He wants forgiveness. The harbor lights blurred. I handed Derek the parrot feather. Give him this. He laughed, the sound brittle. Still teaching lessons? I walked away, his shadow dissolving into the graffiti's glow. Months later, a package arrived. Inside, the serpent and rose tattoo preserved in resin. No note. I placed it on the classroom windowsill, where the sun fractured it into rainbows. The children marveled, calling it magia. On the Day of the Dead, we built an altar, Macbeth's quotes beside marigolds, Derek's painting propped against sugar skulls. Who's it for? A girl asked, clutching her doll. Ghosts, I said. The kind that stop haunting. That night, I dreamt of Machu Picchu. The condor circled lower, its wings brushing my cheeks. When I woke, the feather on the board had turned to gold. Or maybe it was just the dawn. Every ending is just the beginning of another story waiting to happen. Don't stop now. Click to discover more stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat.